Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through the entire drawing process of this hyper-realistic elderly woman portrait. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this premium 350 GSM paper by Gruppo Coordinates, which was imported from Belgium. And the drawing portion area is 11 x 17 inches. But the surface of this drawing paper is quite similar to the ordinary chart paper or any other smooth surface drawing paper pad or Bristol pad, so you can use whichever is available. I drew the outlines using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so before moving on to the shading process, let's mask the edges of this drawing paper using a masking tape to prevent graphite from spilling over the borders. Okay, so let's start the shading process, and to mimic white and bright hair, I'm adding these few indentation lines. I'm using a nail art dotting tool and adding these lines in the direction of the strokes we have added earlier during the outlining process. To keep the strokes natural, I'm keeping the pressure low in the start and then gradually increasing it while doing flicking motions. And this will result in strokes with thin ends, just like the way we need here. And also, to make sure you are adding these indentations correctly, you can monitor them from a side angle. When the indentation in the whole hair portion is done, it's time to add a base layer, and I'm using my 8B pencil. I'm going over the whole area in sections by maintaining a very low angle and pressure on my pencil, because higher angle and pressure will fill the graphite inside the indentation lines, and it will make them look dull. Keep on layering the graphite onto the hair portion to achieve the desired darkness. For the forehead portion, I'm using a pressure technique to add a 3D base using the same 8B pencil. I'm applying higher pressure to shade the direction lines and keeping the angle low on my pencil, and then gradually decreasing the pressure as I move towards the lighter ones to achieve the required darker and lighter tones without any harsh barriers. I'm repeating the similar process for the rest of the hair and forehead portion. Notice that I'm layering more graphite over the sides of the forehead to create required shadowed effect. Okay, so when the base layer in this portion is done, it's time to add the highlights. And I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser for this purpose. And make sure to keep the tip of your eraser clean and sharp. I'm carefully going in between the indentation lines to pick up any excess graphite inside them. I'm also adding a few softer strokes in between these indented ones to give the whole area a more natural look. You can also use an electric eraser if the highlights are not looking as bright as needed, just like the way I'm doing here to brighten up some of these strokes. I'm adding a few darker strokes using an 8B pencils to make the highlight appear thin and separated from each other. Okay, so let's move on to the forehead portion, and to create hyper-realistic skin texture, I'll be layering different tones of highlights. I'm firstly adding these small strokes and lines using a sharp tip perfection eraser. And notice that I'm focusing on adding these highlights onto the lighter areas only, and not topping them off with some brighter highlights using a mono zero eraser. To make them appear even more bright, I'm going over some of the highlights on the right side with a sharp tip electric eraser. And look how detailed the texture has started to look. I'm following the similar process for the lower folds as well, as the highlights here don't need too many defined strokes, so I'm shifting towards my kneaded eraser. I have shaped it into thin tip and now picking up the excess graphite from these lighter areas. I'm lightly swiping it along the darker areas to mimic the required highlight. By the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outlines and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. It has always been my goal to provide free tutorials and information on drawing and art related tools to general public. And keeping with that theme, I would like to thank all these incredible individuals who backed our channel on Patreon last month. Their generous support enabled me to produce this free tutorial for all of you guys. Okay, so when the softer highlights are done, I'm adding some final touches to the highlights using an electric eraser. Carefully add these small strokes and dots over the previous highlights and avoid overlapping them on darker areas. Because it's very important to layer multiple textures with differences in tones while working on a hyper-realistic drawing. Okay, so let's move on to the next portion, and as always, I'm following similar method as I usually follow. I'm carefully filling the iris and darkening the directional lines using an 8B pencil and maintaining a high pressure on it. Now I am reducing the pressure on my pencil and filling in the whole portion to add a base layer. Also notice that I'm keeping my pencil at a very low angle to achieve a blended base without any harsh lines or strokes. Okay, now let's layer a 6B graphite powder over the nose and cheek portion, and I'm using my bigger size toy brush. Make sure to use lighter pressure on your brush and add this layer in circular motions to avoid patchiness. Also notice that I'm layering more powder on the darker areas to achieve a 3D base. I'm using a medium-sized toy brush as it fills all the nooks and corners without spilling the graphite onto the surrounding portions. Now let's start the highlighting process, and I decided to use a kneaded eraser as I received so many comments about using a kneadable eraser for realistic highlights and texture. So first of all, shape it into a thin round tip and then start dabbing it over the areas which are lighter. You can also use a back and forth motions, but keep the pressure very low on your eraser, because the texture of a kneaded eraser is kind of sticky. So when you apply higher pressure, it starts to stick to the paper and create some mess. I'm going over the lighter areas carefully to pick up all the excess graphite, and make sure not to overlap these highlights over the darker portions, as it will make the whole area look flat instead of 3D. Continue adding these highlights over the whole upper face portion, and notice that I'm picking up more graphite from the areas which need brighter highlights. Okay, so when the basic highlights are done, it's time to add darker skin texture, and for that I'm using my 3B pencil. I'm adding these small dots of random sizes over the center portion of the forehead. Also notice that I'm applying variable pressure to achieve a mixture of lighter and darker dots. And as I move away from the center portion, I'm changing the length and direction of these strokes to achieve required texture. I'm also adding these hair strokes for the starting portion of the both eyebrows respectively, and I'm using the same 3B pencil here. Now moving on to the right under eye portion, and I'm adding these slant horizontal strokes close together to mimic the wrinkles and folds texture. I'm also shading the darker areas near the fingers to create a shadowed effect. For the left side, I'm repeating the similar process of adding a mixture of small lines and strokes over the lighter areas to create wrinkles effect. Okay, so moving towards the left cheek portion, and I've started adding dots of random sizes to mimic the pores and freckles. Notice that I'm maintaining a very low angle to achieve blended texture. I'm repeating the similar process of texturing for the nose as well, but I'm changing the length and direction of these strokes depending upon the area I'm working on. When the darker texture is in place, I'm picking up small size blending stump and going around some of these textural dots we have added earlier, and this will make them appear darker in the center and blended from the edges, creating a perfect pores texture. And it will also create the illusion of depth, making the pores look slightly embedded in the skin. And now it's time to make the texture look 3D, and for that I'm carefully adding a mixture of small dots and strokes in between the dark ones. And I'm using a perfection eraser for now, as the texture here is softer and blended. And as we move towards the eyebrows, the texture is becoming more prominent. So I'm switching towards my mono zero eraser. I have created a round tip and now adding these small lines and strokes in between the darker ones. The lighter strokes right beside the darker ones make the overall texture appear more realistic and detailed, just like this. I'm also adding these small dots where required. I'm repeating the similar process of adding thin strokes and lines for the right eye as well. And to make the highlights pop up even more, I'm adding a mixture of some brighter dots and strokes in between and over the previous highlights. And if some highlights are looking too white, you can adjust their thickness by adding darker strokes right beside them, just like this. I'm going back and forth with my tools and adding these highlights and texture where required. As the pupil is jet black, the electric razor highlights didn't turn out as bright as we wanted. So I'm topping them off using my jelly roll pen to make the pupil look shiny. Now moving on to the left eye, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding the highlights using erasers first and then adding final touches with a jelly roll pen to make the eye appear more shiny and watery. And to further fine tune the texture, I usually add darker strokes around the lighter ones to make the highlights even more precise and thin. And see how realistic and detailed the area has started to look. I was not satisfied with the brightness of these highlights on the upper eyelid portion, so I'm adjusting it by adding highlights using a jelly roll pen. You might have struggled with jelly roll highlights as they appear to blend from the ends. So here is a pro tip. To make them blend with the surroundings, I shade the ends using a lighter grade pencil and see how realistic the texture has started to look. Okay, so let's move on to the lower portion of the eye, and I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser to add these small intricate strokes. And also notice that I'm only adding these lighter strokes in between the darker ones, as the overlapping of darker and lighter texture will make the whole area look monotoned. And keep on adding these thin strokes of random length over the whole left cheek portion. Okay, so when the mono zero eraser highlights are in place, it's time to fine tune them, and I'm using my 3B pencil for this purpose. I'm going along the lighter strokes, and look how thin the highlights have started to look. And make sure to create a chisel tip of your pencil while working on such tiny details to avoid thick strokes. Now it's time to add some final touches to the texture, and for that I'm adding a mixture of small dots and strokes using an electric razor. I'm going over the previous highlights along with adding some new ones where required. You can always go back and adjust the details where required until you are fully satisfied with the texture. Moving on to the nose, and the process of highlighting is almost the same as we did earlier for the left cheek portion. So I'm following a similar method and adding these small strokes of random length and direction. Also notice that I'm applying lighter pressure on the shadowed portions and increasing it for the brighter ones. For the areas around the nostrils, I'm shifting towards my perfection eraser as we want softer highlights here. You can also use the same mono zero eraser if you have a good grip, but with a very light hand to achieve such an effect. The darker texture on the tip of the nose is looking a bit dull, so I'm adjusting it using the same 3B pencil. You can blend these dots and create a softer edge by going over them with a small size blending stump. Due to highlighting with erasers, the darker texture faded away. So I'm adjusting it by adding darker dots using a 3B pencil and then going along the edges with a 2H pencil. It will embed the graphite along with creating a softer look. I'm topping the upper portion of the nose with brighter highlights using an electric razor. And look how shiny the texture has started to look, just like the way we want here. Okay, so let's move on to the hand, and as always I'm adding a base layer using my favorite pressure technique. I'm applying less pressure for the lighter areas and then gradually increasing it as I move towards the darker ones. And that's how you can create a 3D base using only one pencil. When the 8P layer is done, it's time to lock this layer, and I'll be using my graphite locking technique. I'm using a 2H pencil and going over the required area with a very light pressure. It will fill any empty spots in the paper texture along with embedding the graphite from previous layers onto its place. Okay, so let's start the highlighting process, and as we can see that the index finger doesn't have too many details. So I'm directly adding the highlights using a mono zero eraser. I'm adding some strokes by maintaining higher pressure and then reducing it to create lighter ones. Keep on adding the highlights using a mono zero eraser to achieve the required results. You can also use a perfection eraser for the softer highlights, just like the way I'm using it here, and creating a softer look. Okay, moving on to the next finger, and it is quite detailed. So I'll be layering multiple highlights, for which I'm firstly creating softer ones using a perfection eraser, and now adding the brighter strokes using a flat tip mono zero eraser. Make sure not to add too many of these brighter strokes, as they will make the area look flat instead of 3D. And look how realistic the texture has started to look, just like the way we need here. As we move towards the next section, I'm following the similar process of adding softer highlights first using a perfection eraser, and then topping it off with brighter and defined highlights using a mono zero eraser. You can also target blend some of these intricate details using a small blending stump to achieve a cohesive look. Okay, now moving on to the next two finger, and the process here is also pretty much same as we did earlier. So I'm adding softer highlights first, and then I will top them off with brighter ones later on. You can also keep the reference image in front of you in either soft or hard form, and take the overall idea of texture to make sure you are on the right track. Okay, now moving on to the left hand, and I'm following the similar process of adding a 3D base layer with an 8B pencil. This face portion peeking through the fingers is quite dark, so I'm increasing the pressure on my pencil and adding a base layer accordingly. And as we move towards the lips and chin portion, the texture is becoming slightly different from the hands. So I'm adding these slant strokes of longer length on the upper lip portion to mimic the wrinkles and folds on the skin. And for the chin, I'm reducing the length of these strokes along with changing the direction of them, depending upon the area I'm working on. This will give us the required 3D effect. I'm also adding some small dots of random sizes in between the texturing process to create pores texture. The area under the chin is pitch black, so I'm thoroughly filling it by maintaining high pressure on my 8B pencil. Keep on adding a 3D base, keeping the pressure variable for the right hand as well. And when the darker texture is done, start blending the left hand fingers by using the blending stump, just like the way I'm doing here. I'm going over the whole portion and embedding the graphite onto its place, and it will not smudge or spill over the surrounding. Now let's add the missing darker details, and I'm darkening the previous strokes along with adding some new ones using my 8B pencil. And for the rest of the area, I'm switching towards the B pencil and using the graphite locking technique. I'm going over the whole portion using a very light hand to embed the graphite into its place, along with filling the empty spots if any. Now let's start the highlighting process, and I'm creating a 3D effect by picking up the graphite from the areas where light is hitting directly. I have kneaded my eraser into a very thin round tip and now tapping it over the required portions. Make sure to knead it more oftenly to increase its effectiveness. For the brighter highlights, apply relatively higher pressure and then reduce it to create softer ones. Now to create softer edges of these highlights, I'm using a perfection eraser and going over the previous highlights. I'm also adding some new ones in between where required. The perfection eraser will allow us to go into all nooks and corners easily without messing the surroundings. Okay, now it's time to add the brighter highlights, and I'm using my mono zero eraser with a flat tip and adding these small straight strokes over the nails. I'm keeping the pressure variable to achieve brighter and softer highlights. For the finger, I'm increasing the pressure on my eraser and adding these small slant strokes in between the darker ones. As this texture is quite thin and bright, so make sure to clean the tip after every 5 or 6 strokes. This will help you in achieving brighter strokes with very less effort and time. As you can notice, a very less amount of light is reaching the lower portion of the hand. So I'm switching towards my perfection eraser. And this will give us the required softer yet defined texture. I'm repeating the similar process of highlighting for the rest of the fingers as well. I also decided to add some softer highlights on the nose and mouth portion before moving back to the fingers. I'm applying higher pressure to achieve brighter strokes and then gradually decreasing it for the lighter ones. Coming back to the fingers, and I'm following the similar method of adding intricate details using a mono zero eraser. The only difference here is that the light is reaching the lower portion of the fingers as well. So I'll be adding highlights and details over that area as well. Keep on relating to the reference image to make sure you are on the right track. Okay, so now let's move on to the mouth portion, and the area near the nose has some brighter texture. So to mimic such an effect, I'm using my mono zero eraser and adding these small but slant strokes very carefully. I'm also adding these same small strokes on the mouth area in between the fingers, but make sure to change the direction to mimic the exact flow of the wrinkles. You can also lightly shade them to make sure they seamlessly merge with the surroundings, just like the way I'm doing here. Now I'm adding these small dots of random sizes using an electric razor to make the area look shiny. Okay, now moving on to the upper lip portion, and the skin here is stretched and it has very prominent skin folds. So to mimic such an effect, I'm adding these slant strokes using my Mono Zero razor. I'm firstly keeping the length shorter and then gradually increasing it as I move away to achieve the required texture. Also notice that I'm keeping the pressure variable on my eraser to achieve softer and brighter strokes respectively. I'm now layering some dots of random sizes over the lighter areas to make it appear more realistic and 3D. After adding the highlights, the texture started to look a bit dull. So I'm again going over the darker strokes and texture using my 3B pencil. And along with adding the depth, it will also fine-tune the thickness of the highlights, making them appear more crisp. The tongue has some sharp bright highlights, so to achieve such an effect, I'm adding a cluster of teeny tiny dots using an electric razor. And for the lower lip, I decided to directly add the highlights and texture using my electric razor. So I'm carefully going in between the darker texture and adding these highlights. I'm keeping the length and direction of these strokes variable and adding them depending upon the area I'm working on. Okay, so let's move on to the chin, and the process here is almost the same as we usually follow. I'm adding base highlights using a Mono Zero razor by going in between the darker strokes very carefully. And when the base highlights are in place, start adding some brighter dots over the previous highlights to give the whole area a more shiny look. You can go back and adjust the darker and brighter details until you are fully satisfied with the required texture. Okay, moving on to the right hand, and I'm following the similar steps of detailing as we did for the left hand. But make sure to change the direction of the respective strokes depending upon the area you are working on. Also, you don't have to follow the exact same step I'm doing here. You can experiment and find your own flow which you find easy and you are comfortable with. And with this last step, we are done with this hyper-realistic elderly woman portrait. Creating these free tutorials needs a significant amount of time and energy. So if you found this one valuable, please show your support by liking this video. Your support keeps me inspired to bring you more creative content. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.